is Joe Thompson, and I'm from Wilmington, Delaware, the Assistant Athletic Director at Wilmington Friends School. Today is going to be a little bit different, obviously under Zoom conditions. And those of you who attended my workshop during the national conference knows this is generally an interactive session where I generally walk around the room and ask a lot of questions to everyone. So what I will do today is I will interject in there a few moments to pause where maybe you can think of questions and answers. And also what I'll do is kind of give you an idea of what the typical answers would be when I did this with an audience. I also would like to start off the presentation by letting you know that this presentation was done in mind for an athletic director like myself or like yourselves, so that we can work with our coaches and maybe give them some different things to think about and give them some guidance and direction in their professional development. I myself was a coach. I coached high school basketball for over 20 years, and I know a lot of the questions and things that I've learned through my journey I'd like to share with you as well today. So please keep in mind as we do a lot of these, and you'll eventually have the PowerPoint presentation, the idea will be that you can take these concepts, these slides, or whatever in here you like, as well as a website that I'll show you that I can give you all my free resources from, and you can use these as an interactive discussion that you could have with your coaches as well. So with that, I'd like to begin. I'd like you or your coaches to imagine walking down a busy street. And as you're walking down the street, you have to look way down in a corner, and over in that corner, you happen to see way in the background one of your former athletes. Now, you as a coach or as an AD, now wonder, did they see me? Because I know I saw them. And the question is this: what will that person do once they look up and see you? Will they come running up to you and throw their arms around you and give you a hug and say, thank you, coach, or thank you, sir, or thank you, Mr. Smith, for the difference you've made in my life, and I've always known that you were a great person that cared about me? Or would they put their heads down knowing that wasn't the greatest experience they ever had, or maybe something just didn't go right in the adventure, and they run across the street and hope you don't see them? That's the kind of things we want to talk about today. Well, what will make that person make one of those two decisions? First of all, I'd like to start out with a disclaimer. I'm not the perfect coach. I was not the perfect coach that had the kids always want to run up and hug me. I had an opportunity to play ball in both high school and college, and I had coaches that taught me how to be a good coach, how to be a great coach, but I also played coaches that taught me how to be a bad coach. And the thing is, along the way, I was able to put together a lot of different pieces and figure out how to do it. However, through a lot of trial error and moving forward in my sport, I learned a lot of different things. And what I realized was, yes, I knew I wanted to be good to the kids and relate to the kids and be a good role model and teach them values. But isn't it interesting, even though we all believe that, at times we get caught up in the winning and losing takes us off focus. It takes us away from our vision. Or as you'll hear me say later on, at times even I forgot my why. See, we all know why we got into this thing, but sometimes all the pressures that we feel, especially today with the environment we're in, makes it even more difficult. But I'd like to talk about those conditions and also talk about how possibly we can share our experience with our coaches, and you as an AD hopefully can kind of give them a compass or a point of focus that they can continue to follow. This is an interesting number. I'm not sure how many people realize. I'm going to let you look at it for a minute and see if you can think what that may mean. Obviously, another way to look at it, I could say, is 12%. What this number represents is the fact that out of 57 million children that play sports up to the age of 8th grade, that's 57 million. We know, according to NFHS numbers, that number drops to 7 million in high school. From 57 million to 7 million. That means that 88% of the kids that are playing at the middle school level and before entering high school have already had enough. We know a lot of factors going on that cause this right now. And our worry is that it's going to get pushed down even further. We have things like all the youth leagues and the expansion of the youth leagues and the expansion of their seasons. We also know the difficulties of working with club sports and the overemphasis of club sports of specialization. And add on top of that, all the parent pressure that these young kids are experiencing at a young age. Yet they bring, the 12% that remain, bring all those experiences with them into their high school experience. So we're already dealing with a different athlete by the time they hit that high school age. That's why today I'd like to talk about some different things rather than just what we call the physical or the fundamental parts of the athletic experience. I'd like to talk about their mind and their hearts. We need to know that the athlete of today is a different athlete, as many of you put in the questions that I was given before the seminar. Alexandria shared all of them with me, and I had a chance to take a look at them. And the good news is, I believe I'll be able to answer most of those questions for you today. Let's start with this quote that many of you may have heard. I'm not sure if you realize it, but it was actually said by Billy Graham, who, even though he felt he was making a difference in the world, said, "No one can get the heart of a child like a coach." Coach says, as we've heard, is one of the most powerful words in the English language. I'd like to share a few numbers with you. A coach will impact more people in 1 year than the average one does in a lifetime. And let's think about that. The average coach will impact 30 to 40 families in one season. Those families, by the way, if I were to ask this in the audience and I go around and I poll people and we start talking about it, hopefully you realize the answers we get would be not just mothers, fathers, aunts, uncles, grandparents, brothers, sisters. We also know that it impacts officials, teammates, other athletes at the school, teachers, administrators, neighbors. So if we really think about that if the average coach impacts 3 to 4 families a year, and the average family right now is averaging about 4.5, I've never met the half, by the way, but if they average 4.5 people, that means that a coach in 1 year will impact up to 200 people. That's a tremendous amount of power that a coach has. But I also want to remind all of us as athletic directors, if our average number of head coaches on our staffs are from 15 to 20 coaches, that means we now have the ability to impact up to 3,000 people in a year. We have a tremendous obligation to our coaches, and hopefully you'll pick up a couple ideas today that maybe will help them make that better impact. One thing we know for sure, the coach's influence is never neutral. So let's talk about this new athlete today. One of the questions was, what's this Generation Z like, and what kind of things do we need to know? I would like to share with you some important facts that we do need to know going forward, besides the fact that only 12% of them have decided to continue their athletic experience. This was based on a survey that was done by Pewter Research 8 years ago. It says that 54% of our athletes don't have both biological parents in the home, and that 44% of our athletes were born out of wedlock. And that we know we have 2 types of parents nowadays. We have the hovering, all-encompassing athlete, or we have the athlete that doesn't care at all and we never see. We also have what I call today the microwave mentality versus the crock pot mentality. I talk to a lot of athletes across the state of Delaware, and I do work with them and their coaches, and it's amazing how many athletes don't even know what a crock pot is. See, they're not used to the idea of patience and perseverance and hard work and effort. Everybody nowadays wants the quick fix. Lord knows if you take a look at the pro athletes, and we went through some of the steroid scandals in baseball, we didn't give them a very good lesson of how to gradually get bigger, faster, stronger. We actually idolized people that did it faster. And now our parents today and our athletes today are still trying to do that. So does it any matter that they quit, and they quit easily? And the last thing is, among teens today, 92% of them go online daily. Why that's an important number? That's where they're getting most of their information. And I might add, which is something I'll refer in the next slide, this is where they make a lot of their choices. So when we put all this together, let's talk about the type of athletes that we're working with now. A lot of them don't have that traditional 2-parent home like we used to have and generations before us used to have. The analogy I always like to use is back in the day, one of the things that a lot of coaches say to us is, why do these athletes quit so much easier? Or why can't they just get it? Or why don't they really care anymore? Well, if you think about it, back when a lot of us were playing ball, the issue was always a coach and a parent working together. The parent took care of making sure that that child was raised with good values, good morals, work ethic. And the coach's job was to make that person a better athlete. But now what has happened? Well, first of all, that coach over here now, many times, according to these numbers, is dealing with two factors, possibly two parents, two separate backgrounds, two separate families. Now, this is not an indictment on families that are remarried. I'm not saying that at all. But what I'm saying is it's a fact that that coach now, instead of dealing with two parents, maybe be dealing with four. And on top of that, he has to deal with which parent at which time wants to take control, or one parent that's active and one parent that's passive. These types of things make it awful difficult for a coach when he then wants to discipline or work with an athlete, because a lot of times he doesn't have that same support structure at his own. And this is something we hear a lot from our veteran coaches. The reality of it is, these are the numbers and they won't change. And as you will hear me say many times during this presentation, there is a place for old school coaching. But old school coaches need to understand it is not the same athlete that we coached many years ago. And actually, as coaches and as athletic directors now, we are actually dealing with two generations, the parent and the athlete, with every decision we make. So what does that look like for today's athlete? Well, all you need to do is take a look at the symbol on the left and that athlete with all the different things that are going on in their minds. And let's think about this for a minute. You want to get inside the mind of that athlete. I use the example of the cell phone, and I like to always hold it up in the class. And I say, think of the impact that this has had on our athletes today. They get all the information they want on it. Believe it or not, they could actually replace a coach, because now they can even get training videos on how to train, and they might think they can learn better than from their coach, which isn't a good thing. But not only that, they also have communication, and they reach out to people, and they have a million choices on this thing. There is no filter on it. I say we forgot that this generation never even knows what a busy signal is. They've never heard one. They don't know what it is to wait. They don't know what it is to be patient. They don't know, they certainly know caller ID. They can't just pick up a phone anymore and know who the other person on the line is. They do that with a cell phone. In addition to that, have you ever sat and watched TV with an athlete or any of our children? I can't do it with my son. I used to watch football games with him, and now I understand why the red zone was created. The red zone was created for this generation because they can't hold their attention for any long periods of time. Long gone is the day when we'd sit and watch through a continuous football game together. I would have to sit and watch 3 or 4 games at one time as he flipped through the channels. You notice there's a million choices up there. The guide to a TV tells you an athlete is processing an incredible amount of information at one time. The last thought I want to leave you with is this. Let's think about all the choices that athlete has. That athlete has more choices than anyone has ever been involved with. And on top of it, let's not forget what he drags in from the middle school experiences. Look at the number of clubs he can play for. Look at the number of coaches he could play for. Look at the number of teams he could play for, or the number of schools he could play for. And that athlete has already gotten accustomed to the fact, if you don't like what you're looking at, if you don't like what you're seeing, if you don't like who you're talking to, just go to another option. Flip the channel, make another phone call, go to another Facebook page. These are the things that we're dealing with our athletes of today. So we wonder why they give up so easily. It doesn't take long to figure that out after a while. The last thing I'd like to leave you with on this page is the fact that, isn't it interesting what they named all these products? You have the iPad, the iMac, and the iPhone. I. That's our generation. Apple knew what they were doing when they marketed to them. We've created the I generation, not the Z generation. And on top of it, if it's not the only product to give you an idea that did not succeed was when Apple came out with something called the Wii. If you remember the Wii, it was an exercise game that you could play, but you had to play it with someone else. Didn't stay on the market very long. Back to the eyes. So what am I saying with all of this and this athlete we're trying to motivate? Well, what I'm saying is we have to rewire our kids' brains or someone else will. We as athletic directors, we as coaches need to play a part in that. A lot of times, regretfully, they're not getting it at home. They're counting on us to do that. They're not getting it from maybe an outside team. They're not getting it from their friends. But you know what else they're not getting, whether the kids want to admit it or not? They're not getting relationships. They may have 9,000 friends and likes and Instagram followers and things like that. But you know, there's another really sad statistic that I didn't show you on the other page. The number one reason for teen suicides in the United States today is suicide. The number one reason is suicide. Why? Because kids are saying they're lonely. Our kids, with all this communication, all these connections, combine it with the slide I just showed you and combine it with this, they are lonely. What are our athletes looking for? Surveys were done, and I'm going to share them with you. There are 3 things that our athletes are looking for because they're continually searching for it, either at home or via all these tools we talked about. I call them the 3 S's. Athletes today, more than anything else, is they want to feel safe, they want to feel secure, and they want to feel significant. Our kids are crying out to be cared for. They may not tell you that, they may not admit it, but this is what they're asking for. They're not asking for, if you don't do what I'm telling you to do, then leave. If you don't like the way we do it, get out. If you don't want to care, then just go run some more. Kids already know enough people don't care about them at times. The last thing we need to do when they come to something they do enjoy is to remind them that they don't have to be there. So let's talk a little bit more about these 3 S's as we go forward. Amanda Visick did a very famous study that was done, and she asked college students, Division 1, 2, and 3, and high school students, what are the top 5 qualities of a coach that they would want to have? And here's what she found out. Number one, they want a coach that respects and encourages. Someone that respects them and encourages them. Number 2, they want a positive role model. Remember the statistics I told you about the Z generation athlete. They're looking for someone they want that not only respects them, but they see as a role model that they want to aspire to be. Number 3, clear, consistent communication. Clear, consistent communication. They don't want mixed messages. They don't want this fist message versus this fist message and a coach giving a third message. They want clear, consistent communication. Number 4, which eventually we would hope shows up, is they do want them to know the sport. Is it the most important thing? No, it is not. And study after study have proven that over the last 5 years. Knowledge of sports is never going to show up in the top 3. And the last one, someone who cares and listens. They don't want to have one-way conversations. They want to have two-way conversation, person to person, and intercommunication. So these are the 5 things that Amanda Visick said as what our coaches need to make sure we understand. You as ADs maybe want to ask your coaches this question and share this survey with them and ask them if their athletes could say these things about them. How would they rate them in these 5 areas? Be a great self-evaluation tool to give your coaches. Let them rank themselves from 1 to 5 in all of these. But you know what they also did? They did another study. And by the way, this study was done with college athletes on scholarship, professional athletes, and high school athletes. They were all done separately. But the number one factor when athletes were asked why do they play sports, the number one factor was to have fun. I think we started to miss this concept somewhere along the line. Club sports, emphasis on scholarships, all state awards, getting noticed, specialization, this push to excel. Even when you hear the language of our coaches use words like drills, and we're going to war, or we're going into battle. Those things aren't fun terms to me. And you know what? I have to admit, even I as a coach at times forgot this factor. And yeah, I made them work hard. And there's nothing wrong with working hard. But the question is, are we having fun? Remember the number I started this workshop out with, 88%. 88% of our kids across the country were not having fun. And they stopped playing sports. One of the other questions all of you asked me, a lot of you asked me, was how do we motivate these kids nowadays? What is it? They just don't want to be motivated the same way. I disagree with that. I think we still have kids that want to be motivated. We have kids that want to care. But here's the thing. They are different athletes that need different forms of motivation. A lot of them do not have the motivation that we all had when we were playing sports and when we were coaching, if we're ADs that used to coach. So let's look at the secret to motivating these athletes today. One of the main questions I kept getting asked over and over is, how do we motivate these athletes and how do we reach their hearts and how do we get to them? Well, let me give you a building block theory that I think makes sense. And this comes after accumulating a lot of knowledge from a lot of good mentors of mine, people like Rod Olson, people like John Gordon, people like Jeff Dukes, Brad Lettering that I've had an opportunity to meet with, Ledbetter. And here's what they said. The first thing on a daily basis is we have to ask ourselves, when our athletes come to practice, are they feeling safe, secure, and significant? Do they feel that way every day? Here's a challenge that I would give to every coach. Are you connecting with every athlete every day? Are you doing something in your practices every day to connect with an athlete? It may be something as simple as just acknowledging them, give them a fist bump, calling them out in practice, making position coaches maybe say, hey, I want all of you to go meet with your individual smaller groups. But are we connecting so that they know that every day we know they're there and we appreciate them? Once we start to do that, we start to address their minds. We're putting them at ease and we're giving them something to look forward for. After we do that for a while, the next thing, and you saw this in the earlier slide, is they are looking for consistency. Our athletes are not seeing consistency outside of the classrooms and outside of the athletic fields. They may not see it at home. They may not see it in other sports. They may not see it in their clubs. But what they want from their coach is the coach that can walk the walk and talk the talk. Is that coach the same? Not only if I see them in the halls or I see them at a game or in practice, is that coach the same day to day? Because here's what happens if we're not consistent day to day. If we're not consistent day to day, that athlete will now begin to stop feeling safe, secure, and significant. And we have to start all over again. Because that athlete doesn't trust us anymore. Consistency now becomes a basis for, if we do that, we now can begin to build trust. And trust becomes the cornerstone of a relationship. If we are consistent and we're honest with our athletes and we care about our athletes will begin to trust us. They're looking for people that they can put their trust in. Remember, respect and encourage. And once we have that trust, we now can start to reach their hearts and build a relationship. There's a lot of different ways to build relationships, and we'll talk about that later on. But this, to me, is the real crux of how we've got to get to our modern day athlete. We've got to make them feel safe, secure, and consistent to get them mentally start feeling right. And then we start working our way to their heart by letting them open themselves up a little bit more and trust us and developing a relationship. Rod Olson states that if you really want to motivate today's athlete, 90% of it is in building a relationship with them. Just let that sink in for a minute. 90% is to build a relationship with your athletes. Are they feeling safe and secure so we can build that relationship? If we build that relationship on a daily basis, it's felt that that athlete will perform much better than one that is motivated by fear. I would think most of you know by now, fear and pressure is only going to last in a short-term basis. And when it becomes long-term, it then begins to dissolve the athletic effort and after a while goes away. So this is it, the main point, or to say the other way, at the heart of what it takes to develop a relationship. So now, ADs, now that we kind of understand that, and we have some, I think this slide gives you a real nice basis to start talking with your coaches about, and you could actually just have a discussion point with your coaching group to talk about, let's talk about different ways we can show we're consistent. Let's talk about different ways to build trust. Let's talk about different ways that you've all been successful building relationships. And now, also, by the way, if you do this with your coaches, you also now are going to be able to motivate them better. Because I also believe we could use this model for ADs as well. Over here on the side, what I've given you is some things that have been mentioned as common, what you will hear me say later, second dimensional issues, which are mental issues that administrators, teachers, and coaches have found to be the main points of emphasis that the athletes have to deal with. And we've talked about these many times before. But what I'm talking about is issues that we need to always keep in mind when we're dealing with these athletes. Things like team cohesion and how are we going to build that? Emotions. We know that our athletes are very emotional, and especially nowadays, and with everything going on, I think this is an area we're really working hard with our athletes to stay connected on. We also have another big area, which is continuing to be more and more important, which is confidence. We need to keep building that athlete's confidence, and we can do that through following these steps. And last but not least, as we talked about, motivation. These are issues that we want to touch on, and we want to have some ways and able to improve these with our athletes. Teddy Roosevelt said, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. I think we know, based on that, what we've talked about with these athletes. And what has also been called by Jeff Dukes, the competitive separator. The coach that gets this, the coach that understands that they need to be consistent to build trust and relationships, is going to have much more of a competitive separator than those people that don't. It will make huge differences in the long run. This is something I like to walk around the room and ask people as I'm doing my session, and we always have some great interchange with this. I always say a 3D coach, which we'll talk about next, which is the 3 dimensions of coaching, knows that what the key to leadership is. But let me ask you all this. Sit down with your coach and ask them specific strategies that they have. We all know that our coaches have strategies for every particular situation. If it's a football coach, we know his offense. If there's a basketball coach, we know his defense, his offense, maybe what his press would be. A volleyball coach, we know his different alignments. A soccer coach, we know his alignments. Field hockey coaches, special situations, and we can go on and on. All of them have strategies. Here's what we do for last minute situations. Here's what we do if we have to play a man down. Here's what we do if we're on offense. Here's what we do if we have to make this key substitution. But here's my question that I ask everyone, because these questions or answers readily come out whenever I do these workshops. Coach, what is your strategy for capturing the mind and heart of your athlete? What is the strategy for capturing the mind and the heart of your athlete? Or another question, Coach, knowing the importance of involving parents in a program, what is your strategy of capturing your parents' minds and hearts? Because anyone that coaches today that don't think they have to make that an important part of their program is going to run into trouble down the road. Most people don't know. And generally when I do the workshop and I ask this question, the room becomes very quiet. But I do say there are ways to do it. Okay, there are ways, and there is a strategy, And I'd like to talk a little bit more about that. And by the way, just for the fact that you are here today and you've come to the seminar, I'm going to give you one of those ideas and a strategy that can capture both of those at the same time. So let's walk into building this strategy a little bit more. If you remember what I told you earlier, I believe that I was taught by some good coaches to care about my athletes, to help them be successful in later life. And I want them to do just as well off the court as on the court. And I wanted them to do well in later life. But I never really understood what that meant. And I never really had a framework from which to work that. But I was fortunate enough to spend 12 years on a journey where I talked to a lot of different people about how to motivate athletes and how to care and how to be a better coach. And this, by the way, was actually when I stepped down from my coaching position and became a full-time athletic director. And I learned a lot of interesting things. But here's the main thing I learned. I've got to have a compass. I've got to set my direction for where I want to go. And I also have to have a vision of what I want to do. And if I have that vision and I have that compass to keep me pointing towards that vision, I may have a much better idea what to do. It's sort of like when you build a house. You walk out onto a piece of ground and you see that piece of ground. And I visualize that piece of ground, and I then begin to look at the home that I like to put on it. Eventually, I know I have to clear that ground and make way for the vision. But before I do that, I need to build a foundation for my house. And it needs to be a solid one that will always be there. ADs, this is the best discussion you can have with your coaches. Your coaches know their why. Joe Ehrman, who we heard speak at one of our national conferences, calls it their transformational purpose. If they want to transform athletes, if they want to help athletes become better people, a coach needs to define his why. ADs, I challenge you to ask each one of your coaches, what is your why and why do you coach? If coaches start to lose sight of their why, they tend to lose their vision, or in this case, their compass. Every time I forgot to remind myself why I coached, it took me off path. But the why becomes the foundation of what they want to do. And this why will always be there. Then when we build the house, we need a framework. We need to have a structure that will hold the house in place, and then we can add the amenities to it, the windows, the doors, the roof. And as we all know, our house over time continues to increase in value. And as we do more things to it and upkeep it and maintain it, eventually we can sell that house and make a nice profit on it. Why? Because we made it better than when we started with it. We need a structure, again, a vision, a framework on which to build our case, to work with our athletes. I call this structure, and I've come to learn it as the three-dimensional model. This gives me a framework that now when I work with my athletes and I work with our coaches, we now talk about these three areas of an athlete: the fundamentals, the psychology of their mind, and their heart. I believe, and it's been stated, that if we do not coach our athletes in all three of these, we are doing them an injustice. And athletes that we do coach in all three of these dimensions reach their fullest potential. So I'd like to take a little bit closer look at these and what I mean by that. The first dimension are things that are measurable. These are things, very objective and measurable things that we all know and all need to be in place. I call these the X's and O's. Every coach has to have them. You can't coach without them, but we also know that these are available much more readily than they've ever been for a coach to learn. And a coach can continue to improve on that. And we as ADs, when we hire coaches, look for people that have good, strong backgrounds in this and understand what we call the fundamentals. That is an important part, and it's measurable. But just as important are some of the things I talked about earlier, the unmeasurable: motivation, confidence, emotions, team cohesion, and goal setting. When we interview coaches, do we ask them a lot about their strategies? But they're probably first dimension strategies. Do any of us ask in our interviews, how do they plan to motivate the modern athlete? How would they handle an athlete who's lost his confidence? How do we handle what seems to be more and more of a typical athlete love when they're doing great, they're great to be around, and when they're doing terrible, They're not. Or how we go about building a team that's very cohesive group that cares about each other. These are things that we also want to be able to talk about. And third dimension, the heart. We need to be teaching our athletes values. We need to be teaching our athletes good self-worth. We need our athletes to, also understand their purpose. And we know that we have ours. How about the athletes? Remember, one of their whys is to have fun. And another one may be to learn how to become a better person. Here's what happens when you coach your athletes in all three dimensions. And these have been proven again. First of all, they're more attentive. One of the other questions someone asked was, how we get these guys to zoom in on what we're talking about a little bit quicker? Well, it goes back to what we talked about. You can't just coach the X and O. You have to get their minds and their hearts as well. They work harder. Athletes that know you care are going to work harder for you. They also will recover from injury quicker. Most of us know as ADs, the athletes that are continually in that training room, a lot of times are sending a different message besides just the injury. Do they not want to be on the field with the coach? Are they looking for attention? Or is it they're looking for someone else to care about? They're more adaptable to new conditions, especially in things like today with this terrible virus that we're dealing with. Can they adapt to new conditions? Can they still remain cohesive? Are teams staying together through this? Are coaches that really understand how to care for their kids working with their coaches, even though they're not on the field doing all the physical things? Are they still working with them with their minds and their hearts? They also will become more creative. The biggest fear, by the way, we talked about why kids play, the biggest fear in sports is failure. The biggest thing our athletes don't want to do is make a mistake and become failures, or make mistakes and not be consistent. Remember, if we go back to what we said about our coaches, consistency is a key to building trust. But if an athlete tries to take chances, let's say in practice, I'm not talking about an important game situation, but if an athlete's willing to take a gamble, go out on the edge or try something new, are we encouraging them or are we discouraging them? And last but not least, a deeper relationship with their players because they're teaching them life lessons. Well, here's the good news for all of you. I throw this out, and wherever I've gone and whenever I've given this workshop, and I've done over 30 of these workshops over the last couple of years, I always get everyone saying it's a different type of insight. I hope I got you to take a look at from a little bit different viewpoint and maybe to think of things a little bit differently. But then everyone says, well, that's great, Joe. Thanks for sharing all this with us. Now, what do we do with it? And where do I go with it? Well, I told you before, part of my mission and part of my purpose is I want to help young coaches. I want to give young coaches the same advice that I wish I had when I first started in my career as a coach. And I kind of had an idea what to do, but whenever I lost track of it, I didn't have someone to get me back online with it. And I needed that compass. Well, the good news is for everyone here, I like to tell you, I like to at least provide you the compass or provide you the tools for the compass and maybe the tools to help you help your coaches have a better experience, and also for you as an AD to take your job as an AD to a whole different level. Because now you can work with your coaches' minds and their hearts as well. What I've developed is a program, and this program is what one coach said to me, that once they start to implement this three-way vision of looking at an athlete, they no longer treated them just as an athlete and not just as a player. They began to see that player as a person that they cared about besides just on the athletic field, and a person, like we said in our earlier street screen, that would want to come down the street and give us a hug and say hello. That's what we want to create. So how do we go about doing that? As I told you, over the last 12 years, I've really been fortunate to meet a lot of great people along my journey, some of which were mentioned in questions that you asked me. People like Rod Olson, the legacy builder, or Joe Ehrmann with Inside Out Coaching, Kevin Toohey, who wrote The Agony of Winning, Frosty Wessering, who wrote Make the Big Time Where You Are, or Jeff Dukes from the Three Dimensional Institute, and also Brad Ledbetter, who wrote What Drives Winning. All of them had a very consistent message, and it all talked about how to get to the hearts and the minds of these athletes. What I've accumulated on a website, which you can see up top, ETA 356, is first of all a section for coaches where your coaches can go, and I put together just a little program. It's a 45-minute program which can step them through how they can learn how to make an impact with their athletes. And I just give them a couple simple ideas, and I call it the 3 C's: how to build connection, how to show they care, and how to build character. And I give them a few exercises they can do with their teams. And then if they're interested in going more in depth into understanding the 3-dimensional model that I talked about, I give you some information and a link that you could go see and learn a little bit more about that as well. In addition to that, you'll notice I have links at the bottom. I have a library with all kinds of books and resources that your coaches can use, or you as part of their professional development may recommend for them to read. I give them websites they can use. I gave them self-assessments, or you could use them with your coaches as self-assessment tools. There are articles for coaches and there are articles for parents. In addition to that, what I've also done is I've given your coaches what I call an opportunity to stock their shelves. Each of these shelves, a 3D model being the shelf structure itself, is what do they do to learn more about fundamentals? Glazier clinics, online clinics, you can send them to clinics. There's plenty of things you can do there. But I've also given them things to stock the shelf for reaching the mind and reaching the heart. I've given you some lessons they can use. I've given over 30 videos they could just show their team and have great discussions with their team about. There's over 20 team building exercises they could use, and over 55 character lessons. All of these you are free to use. There is no charge. I had the benefit of receiving them from others, and I hope you also can enjoy the same benefits and pass them on, because we're all in this to make an impact. I did promise you I would give you one example of an exercise that if I were to coach again, I'd do every day. And I believe there's successful programs across the country right now that will tell you they're doing it every day and they believe in it. As a matter of fact, one of the most famous people that you'll hear do this is Dabo Swinney at Clemson and Pete Carroll with the Seattle Seahawks. It's called the put-up game. And this can be done after practices or games. What we recommend you do is, first of all, keep in mind the 3 S's, because this hits all 3 of them. Your athletes will feel safe, secure, and significant. The way to do it is you need to look for specific things that you saw done well in practice or the game. And this, by the way, can be anything that demonstrates things the athlete controls. As we all know, they control 2 things, and 2 things only: their attitude and their effort. It also includes how they treat others as part of their effort. By the way, the put-up game can be done by anyone. It can be done by your athletes, by your assistant coaches, by your coaches, by you as an AD coming and watching a practice. It can be done coach to coach, assistant coach to player, player to captain, freshman to senior, whatever you may want. And what you would do is you would get your team together after a practice. Or better yet, if you catch one of those what we call great teachable moments during a practice, stop the practice and get everyone together and let someone say, "Coach, I have a put-up today I would like to give." What would it look like? Oh, the put-up may be, I saw Cameron hustling on a triangle drill. Or Billy got water for us during a timeout, and that could be from a starter. Lindsay played tough defense, and I admired how she always got up off the turf. Quick, short, concise comments that says something good about their attitude and effort. You want to start seeing guys on the bench feel safe, secure, and significant? Watch when a starter compliments them for something they do. Or watch when a senior says something to a freshman. These things work, and I believe you do them in a circle, because in a circle you're all together, and everyone's equal, and you're stronger in a circle. I will tell you that the last 2 years I coached basketball, I actually did this after games. Instead of going into a locker room, which we all know can either be something very good or something very bad happening, either we're so excited that we say crazy things, or we're so mad we say some dumb things, I would stay out on the floor with our players and say, guys, we're going to do put-ups out on the floor. And our players, it took a while to get used to, but they got used to it. And after a while, by the way, I also let them invite their parents into it. You want to see an amazed group of people, instead of Billy riding home in a car with his mom, who's mad because he only scored 12 points instead of 20, yet Billy gets 3 put-ups for what a team player is and what a great pass he made. And the bench guy that Billy let go into the game at the end of the game thanks him for it. It really takes a lot of wind out of sails on what we call that famous ride home. And as we all know, how many times after a practice or a game, the first question a parent asks a kid when they get home? What did coach say? Well, the put-up game can negate a lot of that, and at the same time, really do a lot to make your athlete feel good in his heart. It's how you build relationships. Many of you have seen what we call the sigmoid curve. If you haven't, it's usually used in the marketing terms, but it also could stand for a lot of different other areas. But if you look at success over time, if you follow the blue line, you'll notice that when you get to point A, you start to reach your peak, as we've heard so many times. And doubt and uncertainty start to creep in. How does this relate to us as ADs and our coaches? This is when your coach starts to wonder if they really want to coach anymore. I've never heard a coach say he didn't want to be a wrestling coach anymore because he didn't want to teach wrestling. I might have heard that he didn't want to deal with those 5 second dimension issues we talked about, or some of those motivation issues we talked about. Or you may hear one of your old school coaches saying, I just can't coach these kids anymore. They don't want to listen to me. And you know what? I just can't do it because they don't want to do it my way. Or a coach, more importantly, might have forgotten his why. I forgot to mention earlier that one of the other best pieces of advice I can give you all as ADs is I would challenge your coach to be able to write their why on one side of an index card, no more than three sentences or 15 to 20 words, and keep it in their pocket. Because when they hit those tough days at point A, when they begin to doubt whether they're doing the good job or not, get them to pull that card out. Or better yet, you ask them to pull the card out and read it to you. Because what I'm saying is, if our coaches will listen to some of the things we've said in this workshop, and you buy into it and understanding that maybe I've given you a different way to look at this, we can reaccelerate that curve at point A and drop back, reassess what we're doing, and decide that it's okay to be old school, but I'd rather see us become old school relevant. Old school value teaching, old school discipline, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying old school doesn't work, but old school relevant meaning that old school coach now knows how to care for the kids like he really wants to and goes back to his why. And maybe we reinvigorate him with some of those lessons that I showed you or some of the examples I gave you. If that works, now we've reinvigorated coach. And I also will tell all of you, I personally have seen that with 4 different coaches that I've worked with. They've all told me the same thing. It not only gave them more energy, it gave them new life, and it gave them a whole different sense of working with their athletes. And I was really glad to say that they are still coaching to this day and making an impact. So coach and ADs, we have talked about the impact we can make. And we know that's an important impact that's never neutral. And we do know that coaches can make a difference. We know it, we've talked about it, and I hope you've had an opportunity to maybe take some things from this that you can start talking to your coaches with in a different direction. Maybe even just take this presentation and step them through the same PowerPoint if you like. If I can help you make an impact with your coach, think of the impact we all can make. John Wooden once said, a good coach can change a game. A great coach can change a lifetime. This is what I hope we can all do with our coaches. ADs, I hope we can change the lifetime of a coach. And I hope we can help our coaches change the lifetime of our athletes. So that now, the next time we walk down that street, either as an AD or a coach, someone will come up and tell us. And my dream is someday they come up and tell us, and what they said at the end was, and that's why I became a coach, because of you. Thank you for your time today. As I said, the PowerPoint will be available. We also will have other information available. You have my email address. It will be here. Or you can reach out to me at eta.com. There's my cell phone. At any time, I'd be more than happy to talk with you if you have any questions. And at this point, I would like to turn it back over to Alexandria to make sure that we've answered most of the questions. And if we haven't, maybe there's one that she would like to share with me. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Alexandria.
I think based on the questions that I saw, it looks like you answered most of them. If anybody has any questions that they feel like weren't answered, feel free to type them in the chat box, and he'll be able to see them. Oh, somebody asked, can you repeat the Teddy quote?
Oh, people don't know how much you care, or people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. I never knew it was Teddy Roosevelt. I always thought it was Rod Olson until he told me different. Let me see.
All right. I don't think I've seen any more questions. Lots of great jobs. So you did a great job.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, but I can't. I have a lot of really good mentors that have really worked with me over the years. And if I had one wish, it would be, I'd like to go back about 25 years and have this wealth of information with me as a new coach. So hopefully we can make a difference with others. That's what we all do as ADs. Then everybody on this session does the exact same thing.
Somebody said, have you implemented this process in urban districts?
Yes, I have. I've worked with 2 schools that are in the city in Wilmington. And we've worked with their entire coaching staff, 15 head coaches. It's a charter school, military school in Wilmington. And we're stepping the coaches through it. We were just starting to do their training when this hit. And once this pandemic hit, they finished up their training online. And what I'll be doing with them starting next year is I'll go in once a week and work with their AD and their coaching staff. And we'll be developing strategies for each of them in their program. So yes, in Delaware, there are 4 schools that have implemented this program of Reaching the Minds and Hearts right now. And I've had 5 other ADs that during this time have had the opportunity to take the 3-dimension course and have gotten certified and now are asking about doing it theirs as well. So it is growing.
Oh, when hiring or evaluating coaches, do the 3 dimensions look a lot different for a middle school coach compared to a high school coach?
You know, in our situation at our school, I would say definitely. I don't know if I can answer for everyone. I can just tell you how I'd answer at our school. At our school, we have a middle school attached to our high school. And if any of you had the opportunity to work with middle schoolers, as we all know, they're kind of a different little group to work with. Our feeling at that point is we want them to learn the basics of the game, but more importantly, we would like them to have fun and see the people care about them and want them to grow and motivate them. So when we look for when we look for our middle school coaches, a lot of times, yes, we want them to know the game, but we're not worried if they know all the ins and outs. And every one of them are always given the charge of make sure at every practice you're doing something fun and you're doing something to connect with every one of your athletes. That to us is just as important at a middle school level because we've shared with them that 88% number, and we don't want that to happen. I would also say that we have hired high school coaches, high school coaches to a good head coach that is as good at X's and O's as anyone there could be, but a good 2nd and 3rd dimension coach is an assistant. And it becomes a great balancing of a staff where they work off each other and it really becomes a nice model. So we'll hire maybe an assistant coach that may not be real versed in 1st dimension at a high school level to be an assistant coach.
I think I see one more question. The stats you gave on 54% don't have both parents in the same home and 44% born out of wedlock. Is that high school athletes or high school students in general?
That is high school high school students in general, high school students.
Okay, I think that's all.
Great. Well, thank you,
All right.
everyone. You all, as I like to tell everyone, you make it a great day because it's a choice. And I believe if we make it a great day and help each other through these days, we'll all be able to survive this thing. And I hope to see all of you at the next national conference. And if you happen to be there and you see me, please come up and say hello and pass on your comments if you feel free to. So thank you, Alexandria.
Thank you, Joe. It was a great presentation.
Okay,
I am going to end the meeting now.
great. Take care, everyone.
Bye.